This video might seem to be about light-hearted tech, but it's actually one of the most interesting and tragic tech tales now being told in its entirety for the very first time. The late 1900s were all about innovation, bringing things to the forefront that previously just weren't possible. And one of those used a sense that even today goes mostly wasted, and that's our sense of smell.
SqSp sponsor content is not filmed in Smell-O-Vision. Smell-O-Vision was an attempt to add another dimension to our sensory entertainment, a bit like a crap 4D cinema. You could get Smell-O-Vision collectible Simpsons cards, you could get collectible Smell-O-Vision packs and cereal, but for us in the UK it was the 1995 BBC Children in Need that awoke our senses. Children in Need is a big campaign that the BBC runs every year to raise money for, well, children in need. It's a night of fundraising TV entertainment fronted by a massive yellow bear, and in 1995 that meant us buying one of these little booklets for £1 and letting Noel Edmonds kick off a night of stench. That might sound horrific, and indeed in many ways it was, but it was also pretty fun. There were several TV shows taking part over several days where you could scratch one of these boxes at the appropriate time and smell whatever was on TV.
Let's try smelling Noel Edmonds and see what we get. Oh, it's like a... It smells like Old Spice. Or Brute. It's actually quite nice.
But once you'd done it, the novelty kind of wore off and you were unlikely to want to experience it again. But that didn't stop a bunch of maverick entrepreneurs riding on the excitement of PCs and the internet. Apparently, the dawn of the millennium was when several companies felt the time and technology were ripe to offer up pungent aromas via your computer, allowing you to sniff your way through the likes of Duke Nukem, Tomb Raider, and Leisure Suit Larry. Sounds fantastic, right? Well, it didn't really go as they had planned. Of course, this concept was nothing new. People had been injecting scents into theatres for over 100 years. In 1868, a Rimmel scent was sprayed into the Alhambra Theatre of Variety during the magic dance of the fairy acorn tree. In 1916, the Rivoli Theatre in New York would pump scents into the air for the film Story of Flowers, and in 1933, Paramount's Rialto Theatre was rigged with a system to deliver various odours during films. But these were all attempts to increase footfall in particular venues. It was never intended to be integral to the film's essence. Various attempts were made to sell the idea as a more integrated part of the film, including Scent-O-Vision, demonstrated at New York's 1939 World Fair, and General Electric's Smell-O-Rama in 1953, which was demonstrated with a 3D rose image giving off various floral scents. But it wasn't until the Charles H. Weiss Company created Aroma-Rama, where filming was created alongside a fragrance process and then pumped into the cinema through the air conditioning system, that the hype really took off. Charles Weiss would comment, "Our audiences will be able to smell the scenes. Among these are odours of grass, earth, exploding firecrackers, a river, incense, burning torches, horses, restaurants, and the scent of a trapped tiger." However, it had competition from the earlier Scent-O-Vision that had now returned as Smell-O-Vision, created by Michael Todd and Hans Lube. However, both of these systems had problems, ranging from lingering and synthetic odours, distracting noises created by pushing odours into the room, and even people sniffing too loudly, keen to catch a whiff due to inconsistent coverage across the four corners of the room. As a homage to early attempts, American film director John Waters would launch the film Polyester in 1981 with scratch and sniff cards that revelers could use throughout, as long as they could see them, a trick that was repeated with various films, and of course 1995's BBC Children in Need. So it was only a matter of time before this concept was applied to PCs and gaming, especially with 90s gamers on the constant hunt for the next absolutely bizarre peripheral to enhance their gaming experience, or detract from it, depending on the piece of tat you bought. It was the winter of 1998 when Joel Bellinson and Dexter Smith, both Stanford graduates, were on holiday in South Beach, Florida, and dreamt up the concept. Sitting around on the beach, Bellinson recounted how there were all these hot ladies, nice beaches, good vibes, and the smells were just hitting me. I took a deep breath and said, "Man, is there some way I can capture this and give all the other loser geeks on the internet a taste of the outside world?" Having previously launched a successful gene sequencing software company called Pangea Systems and the website Double Twist, Bellinson, a molecular biologist, and Smith, an industrial engineer, had the know-how, they thought, to put it to the test. They could also get the initial finance, having already founded their own venture catalyst company, Libra Digital, which had helped the likes of Mark Cantor's Broadland Mechanics, Cantor having previously founded Macromedia. Upon returning from Florida to their base in California, Bellinson started investigating the role genes play in detecting smells, finding an experiment where neurobiologist Linda Buck engineered a virus to stimulate odor receptors. She discovered that when odor molecules drift into the nose, each of them binds with a particular protein on the surface of a neuron. There are approximately 1,000 odor-matching proteins across a human's 10 million odor-detecting neurons. When the shape of an odor molecule matches the shape of a protein, they lock together, triggering the neuron and sending a signal to the brain which recognizes the smell. The problem was no one knew the exact shape of the various proteins, so he searched for other proteins that may be similar, finding them in bacteria. This allowed him to create a smell index, writing software algorithms to simulate the binding of odor molecules with proteins and using trial and error to fine-tune the output fragrances. I caught up with Joel, who's now living in Uganda, to get some further background on how this came to be. Kitted out with a t-shirt bearing the brand of the logo, Joel dived into his background first.
No, I came out of Stanford, first Harvard in chemistry, Stanford biochem and international relations. And I had come out of a Nobel Prize winning lab, Paul Berg, who had invented recombinant DNA cutting and pasting, and I ended up getting involved with pioneering DNA writing and reading, synthesis and sequencing. My friend's girlfriend had found those genes in rodents, and Linda Buck, she won the Nobel Prize, and I leveraged her data and found the homologs in macaque monkeys first and then humans. And then we made three-dimensional models of the receptors, and then we modeled how fragrance molecules would stimulate those receptors. And so that was how we indexed fragrances, since they're a collection of chemicals at different ratios that each interact with all the different receptors to varying degrees. And that became a way for indexing.
Using the likes of smell-o-vision for inspiration, Bellinson's idea then was to generate thousands of odors just by blending them with different proportions of 64 primary scents. Using this, the recipes could be encoded in files, and the chemical components, held in printer-like cartridges, could be combined and transmitted through a USB-powered desktop device, wafting them into the user's face on demand. After enticing various executives from Sega, NEC, Sprint, Transamerica and Bath & Body Works, offering knowledge of both tech and the world of fragrances, they formed DigiScents in February 1999 and got to work on developing their product. A product that needed to be both software and hardware in form, although DigiScents really wanted to concentrate on the software with their main intention of developing a fully fragranced internet superhighway. Their idea was to develop this smell index they could license to websites and software developers whilst outsourcing the hardware manufacture to other companies. This would, for example, allow you to test perfumes online, get a whiff of banoffee pie from a food retailer, send a virtual bouquet of flowers, or even get a whiff of a fully interactive online world. The fact that smell bypasses the conscious brain and communicates directly with the limbic system meant it could evoke emotions that were literally uncontrollable, a powerful tool to whoever wields it. It's why malls pipe food smells into the shops surrounding food courts. Now, sponsor Squarespace may not have a smell-o-vision feature, probably for the best, but it does have plenty of others. And using Blueprint AI is very easy to set up a site. Sickeningly so. No reams of typing out HTML and style sheets, just a few clicks, and you're done. Optimized for SEO and mobile, ready to go. I particularly like how you can change colour sets or fonts on the fly so it looks good, whatever the style of your business or product. Just head to Squarespace to get started, and then when you're ready, squarespace.com/nostalgianerd to get 10% off a website or domain. The team weren't stupid, they knew where the money lay if this thing was successful, but they also knew it would be an uphill struggle to market successfully and without ridicule. Bellinson himself was quoted as saying, "There's something funny about putting a computer-controlled smell machine on your desktop," which there very much is. Indeed, even the idea of your computer creating smells had already been spoofed online. The website realaroma.com had conceived of the raw HTML concept, Real Aroma Hypertext Markup Language, and even jested about a 3-vowel contraption that essentially was supposed to do the exact same thing that DigiScents were working on. They even had their own smell index, using hex codes akin to selecting colours for a web page. So to combat this, they needed to first develop a vision, a credible vision, which meant they needed to deliver working examples and they needed to deliver the means for this to work. But first order of the day was to create a prototype, and by that, I mean something for people to look at in magazines, so they didn't think the whole thing was a joke. After all, nothing says we're serious more than a Star Trek-style yacht to stick on your desk, especially a Star Trek-style yacht to stick on your desk that was called I Smell. Yes, Apple would be proud. Armed with this and a range of scents, DigiScents went about creating a hype train the world had never seen nor smelt, and the media absolutely lapped it up, from the general media to gaming publications like the official Sega Dreamcast magazine, who were concerned that people would start sending stink bombs via email. It seeped into every crevice it could find. In fact, it generated so much publicity that Wired magazine even created a scratch and sniff front cover for the occasion on their November 1999 issue, with the words "Smell the Future" over an armpit drawn by spumco.com, which is well worth checking out on the Internet Archive if you're not already familiar.
Yeah, it still smells.
The article featured a detailed interview with Bellinson, Smith, and indeed Mark Cantor, who was keen to use the technology across the internet, synchronized with movies, videos, and music. Charles Platt, the interviewer, writes, "Bellinson, who sounds edgy and looks sleep-deprived, has been pitching his new paradigm to me with the manic charisma of an infomercial host. The way he sees it, scentography is going to transform the entertainment media spectrum, all the way from web surfing to Hollywood movies. We're sitting in Bellison's immaculately renovated 1920s apartment in Oakland, California, overlooking a grand panorama of downtown and Lake Merritt, but no one's checking out the view. We move closer to an IBM ThinkPad that rests on an ornate glass top table. Smith rolls the track point, shifting the cursor arrow to a picture of some green grapes. He clicks on them. Beside the ThinkPad, linked via serial cable, sits a black plastic box 3 inches tall, 2 inches wide and 5 inches deep, about the size of an electric pencil sharpener. Somewhere inside it has a little fan that starts whirring, drawing air in at the back and blowing it over tiny vials of oils that are being heated selectively in response to signals from the computer. The air picks up the oily fragrance and wafts it out through a 2-inch vent. I straighten up and give Bellinson and Smith an apologetic look. It smells like cheap perfume. Smith scrolls to a picture of oranges. He clicks on them. Once more I breathe deeply. Orange peel, I report. My hosts relax in their chairs, looking immensely relieved. Cantor initiates a sequence of movie clips, and in a window on the screen we're transported to Oz. Dorothy, the lion, and the scarecrow are venturing into the forest, and its trees are not merely visible, but sniffable. Ah, Cantor exclaims, smell that cedar. And it's true. A cedar fragrance emerges from the little black box beside the computer. Now the Wicked Witch is mixing a poison potion over a crackling fire. Oh, that wood smoke, Cantor cries with delight. Indeed, the box emits a smoky tang without the smoke. So, by the end of '99, DigiScents did at least have a mystery black box that looked nothing like their prototype but did in fact emit smells. In that session, 26 scents were tested, including Donkey Kong's Bananas, with Platt commenting that the smells cleared pretty quickly, allowing for new fragrances to be delivered in fairly rapid succession. Cantor, who was working alongside the team at that point, notes, Luckily, we have a world-class sensory psychologist on staff who'll be able to work out exactly the median time frame that is appropriate for refreshing the nostrils. I asked Joel for more details on how all this worked.
64 basic primaries, and they had a 10x range. We wish we could have done a bigger range. I just figured, if we can at least get to market, even with the Atari, we'll eventually get to the more sophisticated. So from that, the combinatorics is probably, countless, but it certainly could make thousands of recognizably different fragrances. I can't say it was perfect. I can't say we were able to elegantly differentiate between all kinds of different high-end fragrances. I would say it was more cartoonish than elegant, but still good enough to set the vibe.
The 64 primaries Joel mentions are the base chemicals which can be combined to produce thousands of fragrances. He showed me how this would work with the Industrial Design version 2, which was ready before the start of the millennium.
This is the industrial design of what it was going to look like. Sorry if it's a little dusty. The goal was to jam then the functional one into this form factor. It'd be in this blue cartridge. Each one of these ridges was a different element. Activates via piezoelectric, like an inkjet printer. So the top of the cartridge had piezoelectric heads attached to a circuit board, and then the blower in the top would suck it up and mix them and blow towards you. It would call forth the appropriate elements of the cartridge in the right ratios to be able to reproduce the thousands of smells that our cartridge could do.
These early prototypes show the circular cartridge to the right and the bellows that would waft the fragrance out. Pretty neat. So, above all, it's clear that DigiScents meant business and they intended to be taken seriously.
And it smells, it stinks, there's odor that comes out of it depending on where you are in the game. It's like smell-o-vision, right?
In early 2000, Victor Lucas would cover this emerging technology in an episode of Electric Playground, with Joel on hand to demonstrate some of the scents. You can even see a copy of that Wired magazine in the foreground.
Oh, we have the smell of gunfire?
You have the smell of gunfire.
Yeah, here, take a little whiff of that.
Oh yeah, well, not that I would know.
Maybe you want to smell a swamp instead.
Now, clearly there was no prototype on hand that day. Instead, Joel just had a collection of fragranced sticks for folks to inhale. Unfortunately, if they wanted to make an impact, they would have to do more than that, and not just promises of a device by the end of the year. That's in part because by this point, they also had 3 rivals. Remember, this was still the .com boom, and if there was an idea, you'd be sure that people would jump on it like flies to a shitfest.
Oh yeah. Whoa, yeah, that's powerful, sweet banana.
This is concentrated.
Okay.
Then we give you pizza.
Even an artificially fragranced shitfest.
An online game. Yeah. Maybe with an...
The first of those was AromaJet, a Dallas company that was focusing on fragrancing video games, albeit with a rather strange device worn around the neck. Then there was a company from Georgia, TriSense, who were promising to ship a simpler implementation but relied on water-based chemicals to keep it simple, with an example given by the company's founder, Elwood Ivy Jr., that it could simulate the odour of a brand new car, but it couldn't simulate the precise aroma of a 2000 Nissan Altima. This product printed the scent, and interestingly also the taste, onto paper, which could then be sniffed or licked at leisure, and apparently was due for release in the last week of April, having received a whopping 50 orders at that point. Finally, there was an Israeli company, Senselt, which was just starting to get off the ground. But it was DigiScents leading the way, and as the year progressed, things started to look even more enticing. In May 2000, it was announced that DigiScents would be partnering with eCandy.com to provide visitors with a total shopping experience, including the sweet smells of the online merchandise. With Rani Ali Ahmed, co-founder of eCandy.com, stating, "Imagine yourself walking into a candy store. The first thing you noticed is the smell." Later that month, Procter & Gamble then announced a research and distribution alliance with DigiScents, giving access to P&G's research methods so it could gauge consumer reaction to adding smell of a product or the effect of including scent with a movie, game, or email.
We had relationships with Kraft Foods, Procter & Gamble and Unilever. Procter & Gamble is going to distribute the device. One of their demands was that we do all the ruggedization testing, which turned out to be very expensive because all those chemicals, they cross-react with plastic, and it's really a combinatoric problem. And we got through it.
By this point, over 2,000 game developers alone had also downloaded the DigiScents software development kit, allowing them to integrate the technology with their latest titles.
So we had partnerships with Microsoft for the Xbox and Sony for PlayStation 2. What did we do with, like, Lara Croft? When your animals were sometimes stalking her and you could smell them. It was so exciting to see anything, movies, video games, commercials with scent.
Real Networks also jumped on board, allowing the Real Player software to be rigged up to dish out free fragrances on demand and even synchronize with media.
We added scent tracks to movies like Saving Private Ryan, and soldiers are walking through the tall, wild fields. You're smelling, the grass, and then you start smelling something nasty, what turned out to be the smell of a dead body.
By the middle of 2000, it really looked like this was going to be a thing, alongside all the other interactive peripherals that were becoming hot news. Anyone remember the force feedback mouse? Working polished prototypes developed by Gene Machines were appearing at trade shows, and the general public were queuing to get a literal whiff of the action. DigiScents were even hoping their competition would ramp up. They envisaged an ecosystem of speaker-sized products they dubbed as Reekers that could have their smell index license to run on them and synthesize with competitor products as well. Yahoo Internet Life even published a special feature on the new ways to interact with the web: smell, touch, and taste. And as you can imagine, basic human instincts were a driving force here. Something that Bellinson mentioned in our interview.
The adult industry was all over it too, by the way. From literal body odors to, some of the performers have names that sound like candy and fruit. It was fun. We were unleashing this whole new thing. It was like giving Jimi Hendrix an electric guitar.
With talk of sweat and pheromones being pumped out of the humble little ice smell box, things were really hotting up. Promises were made that iSmell would be ready by early 2001, with a price tag of under $200 and scent cartridges posited to be available for under $50 each. Each cartridge expected to last a few months, which could turn out to be quite an expensive gimmick, especially with special cartridges for different experiences.
If you wanted to get fine-tuned, you could have specific cartridges for different applications. And then you could have, if you wanted to just do a first-person shooter, well, you're going to need a hell of a lot more, gunpowder, things like that. Or if you're going to do a racing game, you're going to need a lot more racing-related smell.
Of course, you might expect knockoff carts to also appear for cheaper, just like with inkjet ink. But the dot-com bubble was starting to burst, and DigiScents knew they needed more money.
So we survived the dot-com crash, actually. We raised a significant amount from two of the fragrance and flavor chemical companies, Quest and Givaudan. They put in $5 million each. We decided to do strategic tie-ups with the chemical makers, and that kept us going after the crash.
Still, by April 2001, there were problems. The Toronto Star ran a headline, "Investors smell a rat at DigiScents." It seemed to the media, at least, that investors were starting to question whether sniffing your computer was the way forward.
Oh yeah, that's a swamp. Here, you have that one.
The reality, according to Joel, was a little different. Although most of their initial funding was gone, on paper things still looked good. They had secured some 5,000 deals with websites, software, and video game developers. The SDK had been downloaded over 5,000 times alone, and interest was strong.
And Sony had told us their experience every time they launched a new category of consumer electronics device. They said, look, it costs $100 million no matter what. You guys haven't raised nearly enough. We had raised $25 million to date. They said, you're going to need at least another $100 million. You should put this device in 1 million people's households for free. And so we're, all right, we need to do much bigger financing than we had planned. And we went out and we did it. And we lined it up. Goldman Sachs was leading, and Givaudan, who had already invested, was going to be the follow-on. and Unilever was going to come in, and each of the major players was going to put up 50 million. In order to get it done, we had to get through our due diligence. With Givaudan, now they wanted to go through a much more serious due diligence process than for the initial investment they had made, which is what eventually bit us in the ass. The CEO at the time was facing a challenge from the CFO, who basically said, hey, when we spun out of Hoffman LaRoche, this was the very first investment that was made, was into DigiScents. It's amazing, everything went great in this due diligence, but that was a big risk we took. It might not have gone well. We should have done this first, bad protocol. And so the CEO was humiliated. And so he dropped out, which killed us.
In a 2001 interview, Joel commented, "We don't fit very easily into what people are funding. We're basically trying to position ourselves for a relaunch. We've mentioned that iSmell could be used in cars or even for medical aromatherapy purposes. But around them, companies were still dropping like flies and investors were still nervous. Despite this, they did manage to secure more funding. At least they would have if it hadn't been for other world events."
That summer, we were trying to get it restarted, because we had run out of cash. We were going to have to do a new financing on harsh terms. And that was okay, anything to survive, right? Morgan Stanley had someone who was a super big fan, and he was determined to recapitalize us. And so we were flying back and forth to New York from the Bay Area. They never quite had the right people in the room. Now, here's the wild thing. My business partner's family was going through some real difficulties. I wanted to help him out. He and I have been best friends for a long time. So I canceled all of our meetings and we went down to Florida to help his family. It culminated on the same day as 9/11. A couple months later, I was like, you know what? Weren't we supposed to be meeting with Morgan Stanley? Let me check our calendar. We had 2 tentative dates set, one, and both at 9 a.m., both on the 50th floor of the World Trade Center. One on September 10th, one on September 11th. The irony is, had we gone on the 10th, we would most certainly have died, because we always were trying to save money and not waste money at hotels. So we would have flown back from Newark to San Francisco, and that was the flight that the passengers crashed in Pennsylvania. Had we done it on September 11th, we would have been there when the plane hit the building on the floor pretty much that it hit. But, not that many people got killed on that floor. As it turned out, some of our bankers did. So that was traumatizing for our champion who was pushing for the recap. So, since several of his buddies had died, everything was just up in the air after that. So 9/11 was really what put the final kibosh on us. And so, maybe this is a sign. Dexter and I running full blast since the late 80s. And we just said, you know what? Maybe it's time to take a break.
By the end of 2001, the company was disbanded and the stink dream was no more. I asked Joel what he might have done differently and whether that may have helped the company.
If I had to do anything differently, I would have gone with a simpler device and not try to be as ambitious. That would be our main critique. But nonetheless, even though we were aiming too high, it was coming together. And unfortunately, with that boardroom battle at Givaudan, that was just a blow from which we didn't end up recovering.
Just like DigiScents, the other products really failed to come to any sort of fruition as well. The demand and the money simply weren't there, although AromaJet is still listed on the Microfab Technologies website. And TriSense did eventually test launch their Scent Dome. It was tested by ISP Telewest in 2004. The dome could create 60 different smells and used codes embedded in an email or web page to produce them. But the funky little device had no way to waft scent towards the user, and it never really got past the testing stage. Since then, various companies have tried to do the same, including integrations with VR, which arguably would be pretty neat. And in fact, Sony just this year announced conceptual technology to allow gamers to smell their games.
Sony is introducing Smell-O-Vision at the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas this week. The goal is to make gaming as immersive for players as possible.
It seems then that this is something that just isn't going away. Which is a blessing and a curse. A blessing because it would be incredibly cool in some titles. Imagine it in Alien Isolation. You could tell by smell if the alien was near. You'd even be able to know what the alien smelt like. Or imagine having to mask odours in Hitman to prevent detection. But it could also be a curse. Can you imagine it being built into your phone and serving adverts? You'd be sitting there at a bus stop and suddenly get a whiff of Mark Zuckerberg's beard as an unwelcome advert seeped out of your pocket. I, for one, am grateful that it didn't get that far. I like to control the fragrances around me if I can.
The world's first scented mobile game experience.
However, it could have been cool. And regardless, the technology behind DigiScents didn't go to waste.
We started another company. We used some of what we had learned with DigiScents on chemical informatics, and we used AI and designed new drugs against malaria and African sleeping sickness. That took me to where I'm speaking to you from in Uganda. Why Uganda? Well, the chief engineer of Double Twist was a Ugandan. So when I had discovered these drugs, he hooked me up with the Ministry of Health here. The head of the World Bank for East Africa bumped into me, recognized me from the news, and gave my name to the Prime Minister, and they appointed me an advisor to the President of Uganda for life science and agribusiness. And so it came back and forth, and then they said, hey, why are you wasting your life in North America? They've done everything they need to do. We have lots of unsolved problems. We need someone to come here, think outside of the box. Look, you're not married, you don't have kids. Come here. So I moved here full-time in 2012, and I've subsequently used that same methodology for my current company that I have a partner with in Belgium, a Genomatrix, where we have digitized the sense of taste. And we work with food and beverage companies in Europe and Asia, helping them reformulate their product to accommodate different dietary niches, either for health reasons or ethical reasons.
Sometimes you just have to let go of something for it actually to become what it needs to be. Until next time, I've been Nostalgia Nerd. Toodaloo.
If you enjoyed this video, then you'll probably enjoy my previous video, which is about the Trojan Room copy pot. It's actually really interesting and features an interview with the creator. Patreon members, you can access the full interview with Joel